Hello and welcome to the Business Podcast at Imperial College Business School. I am your host, Amin Siala, and today's episode is going to be about everything to do with voice, and voice technology specifically. With me today is Rajesh Bhargave, an assistant professor here at Imperial College Business School. He is actually an assistant professor of marketing whose research is focused on the psychology of consumer behavior. In his publications, you can read insights on how consumers use new technologies in decision making. For instance, how shoppers behave in store when they have access to their smartphones, or how people process information when they are online with others. He has a PhD in marketing from the Wharton School in Philadelphia. Rajesh, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And
Thanks
to my left here is Sina Kahen. Sina Kahen is a part-time MBA student at Imperial College and has been working in the biotechnology industry for over 7 years. Since arriving at Imperial in September of 2017, Sina has founded VAICE, V-A-I-C-E, a pro bono consulting team of MBAs that help brands discover the benefits of voice technology and helps them develop their voice strategy on platforms such as Amazon Alexa and Google Home. His academic background is in biomedical sciences, religion, and philosophy. Sina, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So we have an extremely exciting topic of conversation today, and I feel like both of your experiences, Rajesh and Sina, it's going to make it a really exciting conversation because we'll be able to hit this problem, this issue, this new rising technology from various angles. So why don't we start with the simple question of what's voice?
Yeah, it's a good start. I mean, I always like to put it in the context of, voice technology. And if we see ever since we started interacting with technology, we've communicated via tools. So whether it was initially the switches, the buttons on a computer, later on the joystick, the mouse, keyboard, and obviously the touchscreen. The mental and physical loads that we had to induce to essentially deal with very basic tasks most of the time were disproportionately high to what could be essentially distilled to a yes or no answer. So what we've got now with voice is that we're using a tool that's been developed over hundreds of thousands of years, an ambient, a descriptive tool that's natural to us, where it's the first time essentially where computers are understanding us. So we can speak our own language and technology responds to that, as opposed to us having to learn how a computer operates and translating our input that way.
So a joystick, so we've historically used joysticks, for example, Nintendo, the early games.
Absolutely.
And that was a way for us to communicate with the computer, to say move left, move right.
Indeed.
Whereas now, voice replaces that tool? How does that work?
So it's not... It depends at what stage of the interaction voice is being used as the interface. But essentially, with regards to joysticks or keyboards, they're very referential. So A on the keyboard is, you press that button, it will refer to something technologically, which will then show up. Whereas with your voice, the way that I like to put it is, if you think about, you have this area in your brain called the Broca's area. Every single activity that you do starts with a voice in your head. Whether it's typing, texting, everything starts as a voice in your head. Now, with the previous tools such as joystick, you had to put that voice in your head through a funnel, almost like a throughput, and change the initial input through the throughput of a joystick or a keyboard for it to then, for the technology to be able to absorb what you're attempting to do.
There was a middleman.
There was a medium that was very, very unnatural to our primal drives.
Yeah.
With voice, now we've got this ambient medium where the voice in your head gets transported to the speech centers in your brain and the muscles. Again, the way that we communicate usually, we don't have to learn. With regards to texting, typing, joystick, we have to learn. And that comes with a lot of cognitive load, which we'll mention later.
Right.
Whereas with voice, we don't have that friction.
So, Rajesh, is that how you see voice?
I see it in the same way, yes. It's about how we learn language at a young age, and that's our first form of kind of symbols that we learn, is learning words and how to put those together and then to communicate. And it's what we use every day, all the time. We're talking in a language. To be able to then interact with technology doing that, that's relatively new. Since voice tech has emerged, but it is the way that ultimately we're going to want to interact with technologies.
Okay.
It's the most natural form.
It's the most natural form, of course. And
the fact that it's the most natural form is what brings its benefits. Because when something's natural and we don't have to, learn the process of, typing and keyboard and et cetera, it means you have time. It means it provides convenience.
Okay.
And, as humans, ever since Homo sapiens were around, we've been time efficient, which I always say is Latin for lazy. So essentially, voice provides that medium that allows us to interact with technology in the most natural way.
I mean, I guess just to continue from what you're saying in the sense of that we're lazy, we want things to be done quicker. We don't want to spend 2 hours cooking. We want the food ready in 10 minutes. That's well, in reality, you can argue it's laziness, but that's efficiency in a way.
Absolutely.
And voice is potentially a way you could do that.
Absolutely.
Let's think about this. Have you ever had an experience where you've lost your own voice? Maybe you were sick or something like this. How frustrating does that feel? You have to communicate with other people using hand gestures or writing down notes, those kinds of things.
Right.
And that frustration is what we're now taking for granted when we interact with technology. And when we get our voice back, that'll be quite revolutionary. It's changing. Now the technology is so much better than a few years back. So the voice is so natural that this is the feeling we're getting. I think we're feeling refreshed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great, I guess, start to the conversation, really. Just to think, okay, so we're talking about voice. Well, before we talk about voice, think about when you don't have your full voice, for example. What does that feel like? How frustrating was that to you on a day-to-day basis? I was like, so that's voice. And it's like, we take it for granted, right? Every day we speak, we communicate, get me coffee, is the camera recording, are you feeling comfortable? But as soon as you miss it, then that's when questions start to arise.
And that's where you get into the arguments with your girlfriend or wife when you said something via text that the context didn't provide the true meaning of what you were trying to say.
Yeah.
So with voice, just in the tone, the way that you communicate in that communicative ability, it's unique.
So on that point, we will be delving into details of voice later, but I can't help but just ask you a question on this with the both of you. So you mentioned if you're going to communicate with your wife, for example, over text. So when you're sending a text saying, would you like me to bring anything with me home? That lacks any emotion, any tone. You don't know what the context of the person asking the question is. So how do you see that difference between somebody saying something or just purely texting it?
The way that I personally see it is, it depends on what on the message is that you're trying to get across. If it's something which is very low involvement, where it doesn't necessarily require a contextual awareness, then there's no concern. But if you're, for example, ordering items, the way that I see it is that with regards to voice, low involvement products is the main element that voice will facilitate transactions for.
Okay.
So anything that doesn't require so much attention to purchase is how voice will essentially provide a solution.
In the early stages.
In the early stages. Long term as well, I still find it challenging that I'm going to go and buy jewelry for my wife via voice interaction. I think voice has its place. Again, the main thing that we're trying to push at VACE especially is that we are not trying to be tech-driven. It's very much needs-driven. Voice is a very, very important interface, but it's not necessarily voice only. Voice will be, again, as we'll discuss later, part of a multimodality of experiences with touch, different senses that we have. But the way that we see voice, going back to what is voice, the way that it's manifested today commercially via Amazon Alexa and Google Home, I think that's the current manifestation of voice. It's the first step in a long, long journey that we're going to have. Similar to when computing began, those computers don't necessarily exist today.
Mm-hmm.
It might manifest in different ways. So that's only one element, the Google Home and the Amazon Alexa.
Okay.
But as we develop throughout this journey, we're going to see it as an interface for our communication with all forms of technology.
Mm-hmm. On the point of Alexa and Google Home, what's a voice app?
Great question. So think of a mobile app. So it's essentially a software application with numerous features, which could either be a gimmick, it either provides utility, social elements, gaming elements, fun elements. So all of those elements would, instead of being provided on a screen per se, screen only, it would be via voice. So Alexa have this platform, the Alexa Skills platform. So they've essentially changed the word app to skill. And if it's Google, the platform is Google Actions. So an action or a skill is the Google and Amazon's word for application.
Okay, so that I think is an extremely important lesson here for anyone listening, because
absolutely.
I would assume anyone listening probably the first time. So the word app in the context of voice is now
either an action if you're dealing with the Google platform, or a skill if you're dealing with the Amazon platform. And I think that ties into the idea that we're trying to humanize as much as we possibly can voice, because you have skills, you have actions, you don't have apps.
It's helping you achieve something, basically,
Absolutely.
right? The voice.
Absolutely. So the application itself, it provides you with whatever elements a mobile app would have provided you. But the way that we see it is that obviously the voice application, since it's coming from a voice assistant, which is trying to mimic human communication, must provide utility. It can't necessarily just be a gimmick.
So I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. I have an Amazon Alexa, and search through the skills marketplace or the skills list, and one of the ones I've downloaded is white noise. So before I'm going to take a nap or sleep, Amazon, open up white noise. For listeners here who haven't Alexa, then it would, that's why I didn't say Alexa, just so your device wouldn't go crazy. And then it just starts playing, and it has on loop, and it knows what to do based on the past settings. So that would be one that provides a lot of utility. That's kind of a regular, habitual kind of thing.
And you have to download that beforehand.
Yeah, you add it to your device.
There's a concept of enable. So you enable.
Even the word is different here.
Absolutely.
So again, this is new terminology altogether.
Absolutely. But even within that process of, if you like, downloading the app, the friction's been taken out compared to previous forms of technology. With a mobile app, you go on your phone, you go to the App Store, you search for the app that you want. You then have to scroll through to find it. Then you click on it. Then you wait for it to be downloaded. Then it goes onto your home screen. Then you've got to click onto the home screen. Whereas with the voice platforms available currently, you say, Alexa, enable Tide. So Tide, for example, an app that was created by the geniuses at Rain Agency in America. Tide is a very well-known detergent company out in America. So they've created a voice app or a voice skill in the context of Alexa, whereby it provides the utility where if you've got a stain on your silk, jacket, you'll say, Alexa, ask Tide how I can remove this blood stain or coffee stain from my silk jacket. And then you have an interactive experience, and then it will guide you through the processes to remove that stain. So there's a perfect example of a voice application or a skill that provides utility to the user. And I think when we discuss later about brands, I think that's the key point brands need to focus on, providing utility.
That is astonishing. Again, we'll definitely be delving into that later for sure. So for those listening then, why do you think we should be paying attention to voice? Regardless, who is this most relevant to? Is this budding entrepreneurs? It's relevant to them? Or is it relevant to brands, big companies, small companies? Is this... I could imagine someone skeptical and listening saying, the voice is really, it's just a little bit of a hype. So what are your thoughts? Rajesh?
Well, I would say first, I think I can understand why people might feel that it's a bit of hype. I think they're basing it on a memory of their first interaction with the voice technology or voice assistant, which might have been a few years back, 5-7 years ago, whenever it was. And
2011 with Siri, absolutely.
2011, yeah, Siri. So if you base it on that experience and you had a frustrating time then voice doesn't seem so great, because all these things that we're saying that voice is going to deliver, wasn't able to deliver it back then. But I would say to those people, important to check it out how it is right now, because the technology improves so quickly on this. Absolutely. And the ecosystem around it. So all the skills and the brands participating. And we just know it's just going to accelerate from here on out.
Yeah.
So
just to add on to that, if we look at any technology that comes onto the scene initially, there's challenges. It's not perfect. So it will improve. But the one thing that we need to really focus on is that it's relevant to everybody, because it's an interface to communicate with all forms of devices and technology. Other forms of new technology arising, such as AR, VR, you'll say that obviously there's relevancy to many different industries and different elements, but voice is the tool to communicate with technology. So to answer your question of who's it relevant to, anybody who's using technology today.
Okay.
It's like someone in 2005 saying, "I don't see how touchscreen is relevant."
Precisely.
Okay, right.
Precisely.
So this is really a fundamental layer in technology.
It's a
moving
new
forward.
interface, and we need to understand that
Interface.
Amazon and Google and Alexa and obviously the HomePod of Apple, which I don't necessarily put in the same category because it's not a smart speaker, they're just the initial manifestations and representations of voice technology in the commercial space. It's early. Voice is not just that.
So what's interesting is that if you look at the data just to back up that voice is creeping on us, you can see from Google Trends that if you compare terms like virtual reality or augmented reality and compare them to the popularity for people searching speech recognition or voice technology or voice tech, there is a significant disparity in there. It seems to be that people are paying so much attention to virtual reality, even though it might only be something that we'll be actively using 50 years from now, 60 years from now, X years from now, compared to voice, which is very, very relevant. It's going to happen in the near future. What are your thoughts?
I think part of it is why it's crept up on us is that voice is so natural that there's not so much of this kind of novelty in looking at it. Once we start to use voice, it'll feel as if we're interacting with a person. Compare that to virtual reality, augmented reality. There you're doing something that is just not human. But it's more important to do those things that are based on our caveman instincts, our caveman principles. This is how we naturally interact, voice. And when we go back to nature, sometimes people don't get as excited. I think it's more just the novelty of virtual reality, augmented reality versus voice tech.
But here's a question. Is that, who's to blame for that? Is that just naturally people aren't going to ever be gravitated towards being excited by voice? Or is it brands and arguably Alexa and Home not marketing it in the right way?
I wouldn't say it's anything to do necessarily with marketing. I think you've hit it on the head there. Things that are foreign, if you like, or things that aren't seem a bit more
innate.
No, the opposite.
Yeah.
Things that are more
exotic
and
magical almost.
Essentially magical. We've romanticized that concept much more so than we would do with a tool that we're using day to day to communicate.
Okay.
And to follow on from your point, the adoption of voice technology compared to VR and AR, I mean, it's incomparable. I think the latest...
What are the numbers on that?
The latest study was done by VoiceSpot.ai and Rain Agency, where they found that 20% of American adults own a device, a voice assistant.
20%?
20%.
Of every American adult
absolutely
owns a device which requires voice as the primary way of communication.
Absolutely. And 11% in the UK. And I think it was by 2022, 50% of searches will be done via voice, which opens up a whole other can of worms. And
this isn't far. This is 4 years from now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we look at the adoption cycle now. I mean, the adoption is much, much, much greater than the adoption that mobile took initially when mobile technology first came on the scene. So for me, it's not a debate about voice. The debate will be in what form will voice really occupy our day-to-day lives. But whether it isn't, the tool for us to communicate, it's not a debate.
Okay. So I'm thinking, just to pick up on the point that Rajesh mentioned earlier about people's first exposure to voice was a very primitive version. It was alpha v.001, right? And they think, oh, is this what these guys are talking about? So I guess maybe it's worth clarifying that we're not just talking about, hey Siri, what's the time? It's 55. We're talking about a lot more than that here. So what is that a lot more?
Yeah, well, currently it's the way I see the development of speech recognition and voice technology is very similar to the development of a baby. It started with understanding syllables. The first IBM Watson in, I think it was in the 1960s, 16 words it recognized. And slowly, the tone, the vocabulary increased, and now we're at a stage where we can get witty responses from Alexa and Google Home. So,
well, just on that point, I'll cut you off. I think if you ask Alexa what it thinks of Google Home or vice versa, one of them says, "Oh, it's actually my best friend," and I really like it. So they've even thought of that dynamic in there. Yeah,
absolutely. So for the applications that we're going to see voice having, from turning on your lights currently to turning on the radio to finding out your financial information, to your bank details, to booking or buying certain things that you want to buy, that's where it's at now. As the technology develops and it gets to know us, to glean the observational data from our interactions with it and then iteratively improve, that's where we're going to really see voice mimicking the human communicative capability. And the way that we see it is the Benjamin Button effect, if you like, whereby the more you use a certain application, it improves. So usually we're used to understanding products as
static,
or it loses value over time when you use a given product. Whereas with voice applications especially, it will improve as we use it because the assistant will get to know us, what we're into, etc., etc.
So just before I pick up on that, Rajesh, who will be monitoring this then? Is this going to be the actual platform? So is this an improvement from within the app itself that will continuously improve?
So it depends how Google and Amazon are going to take it. Currently, they've obviously opened up their platform for developers to develop apps. So within the apps themselves, whoever's managing them will have to imbue the capability to be able to glean the data. But beyond that, Google will have to do the same thing. I mean, one of the reasons why I always say that Google is way ahead of Amazon when it comes to intelligence. Alexa has 70% of the market right now compared to Google. But the reason why Google will, take over.
So Alexa, 70% of the market. 70%, every single voice.
So, yeah, Alexa is 70% of the voice market currently.
Worldwide.
Okay. So wherever it's released.
That's a significant majority.
It's significant, but that's because they had about a year and a half first mover advantage.
Wow.
But Google already, considering when they came out in 2016, they're already catching up, and they've got the intelligence, back to the point I was making, that they've gotten to know who we are through their tool of search that they've provided us. We ask very ambiguous questions that Google tends to understand what we mean. And it's, the secrets that Google knows about us, the things that we search, me anyway, we don't want our friends and family to know about.
Sure.
So that's data source, as Larry Page has said, he essentially created an artificial intelligence when he created Google search, because he's managed to gather the intelligence and data about us as users, that Google Home having that source of information, I think Alexa will be hard fought to beat.
Rajesh?
Yeah, I like this analogy of the development of the baby, because part of what we'll see then is not just as the technology learning, but the specific device that you interact with. Let's say the one that you have at your home will get to know you personally better, and that's going to make a huge difference in the way we feel about the device, or let's say this assistant with Alexa or Google Home. When you feel that personal touch between you and this device. And so I think
there's an emotional aspect to this.
There's an emotional aspect to it. And I think once that happens, these kinds of trends where people are ignoring voice today, once they see how well it's developed and see themselves using it in their day-to-day life, I think you'll see a lot more interest right away. You'll see all the applications and this whole VR, AR, I think We'll take a backstage for some time, and we'll focus more on ways in which we can use voice.
Yeah,
I think VR fails to live up to the hype. AR is, I think, has plenty of use cases, but voice I wouldn't even put in the same category.
Well, I like what you mentioned about earlier. You said you'd much rather approach it on a need basis. So you think that's what we should prioritize first. What do we need as opposed to, this is fun to do?
The way that I'd look at it is think of any specific activity that you currently do on your mobile app or a laptop. See how many steps it takes. If you want to book a specific flight, okay, as I mentioned with downloading the mobile app as an example, if you want to book a flight, you go online, you've got to put the voice in your head that says, I want to book a flight to Los Angeles, through the throughput, the funnel of this foreign language of typing, where you've got this QWERTY keyboard, which isn't natural to us. No. It's become natural to us, essentially, because we've been using it. It isn't
even the most efficient way of typing.
Exactly. So you type it out. First of all, you turn on the computer, you go onto Chrome or whatever it is, you go onto the website, you search, you put in the from, to, date, etc., etc., etc. It's a 12-step process. Even more. With the voice assistant in your home, you could say, Alexa, find me the price for a ticket to Los Angeles on May the 23rd in the afternoon. That is, one step. 2
Wow.
steps, arguably.
Mm-hmm.
So within everything that we're saying, the focus, the benefit of voice, if anyone wants to take anything away from the benefit of voice technology, is that it saves you time. And that is what we need as humans, especially it allows us to have the creative capabilities that we never had before. So the amount of time, the things that I'm really excited for is, I don't know how many times you had an idea for an application, but you know that there's a whole process of developing, et cetera, et cetera. So again, us having to understand the language of the system to be able to develop an app for it. I see a future where we'll be able to develop applications via voice. So the technical barriers that are currently present to develop or to, manifest our creative essence, they're going to be removed. So that opens up a whole revolution of creativity that we wouldn't have seen before, because we'll be actuating and creating all of this, utility and innovation via a natural medium. And that bloody well excites me.
Absolutely. Rajesh, your focus has been on consumer behavior.
Mm-hmm.
How does voice and consumer behavior, do they tie in at all?
They tie in so much because we're thinking about voice now in terms of its use for decision making on the one side, and then also the ways in which brands interact with consumers. So the idea of the voice persona we'll touch on a little bit later, but just think about it as searching for a flight as this example. The kind of term we use to describe this difference between using your keyboard versus using your voice, it's about fluency. That's the term. So it means when we're having to do a task that feels easier to us, where we don't feel this cognitive load, as we've said earlier, that releases our, for one, creative capabilities. It makes us more inclined to say, do that task in the first place. It even changes what we ultimately decide, like what kind of product you end up picking or what flight you pick or those kinds of things. So I see voice tech as giving you consumers this opportunity to be much more fluent in day-to-day lives. And then when that happens, the implications are all over the place.
By fluent, you mean what's easier?
What's easier, what feels to you as a less frustrating process. So as people go about, say, searching for a flight or doing anything, they're thinking about, how does this make me feel? And it's a very non-conscious kind of feeling. I'm feeling disfluent, I'm feeling fluent. When they're feeling fluent, then they continue on with that momentum, getting the task done. They tend to like the process much more, and that has implications for, let's say, how you're evaluating the brand that you're looking at while you're purchasing.
And whether you're going to make future purchases.
Whether you want to make it a habit. Yeah. If it's frustrating, we are less inclined to do it in the future. These things can have huge effects. So when you look at fluency, how it's been studied before, it's more things like if I'm reading text that's complicated or difficult to read font or something like this, or on a screen with a bad refresh rate or something like this. But the most fluent you can get is to just interact with someone in a natural way. Yeah. And that's basically what we're getting at. So I see that the fluency as a big part of how voice tech will influence consumer behavior. Yeah. Especially when we're searching for products and things like this.
It's interesting, based on the little research I've done really on data, and particularly the monetization of voice. Apparently the click-through rates, if you like, for advertisements, or the conversion rate, so to speak, are significantly higher when there's an advertisement done through voice compared to text. So if there is a voice app, or if you're interacting with your Alexa or Google Home, and a voice advertisement comes in, apparently it's much more likely to actually convert customers. Out of, for example, 1,000 people that would have heard it, more likely to convert, because it doesn't become a matter of a yes or no. Would you like to, buy gloves because the weather is cold outside? It's more, did you know that, we've got these gloves? It becomes a lot more contextual. So it allows brands to get closer to the consumer and offer them arguably more relevant products to them. I was actually having this conversation. I was at LBS a couple of weeks back, and I had a conversation with a group of MBA students there. And what I heard from one particular guy, he said, actually, I'm not too happy with ads at the moment. Ads, now he wasn't saying that he doesn't like ads. He's saying, why are they not relevant to me? If ads were relevant, I might purchase. But they're not relevant. So there's that challenge as well. I don't know. So how does this tie in, Rajesh?
Yeah, I think the big part of it is getting to learn more about your consumers through the interaction with the voice tech. And that increases the chance of giving relevant content in the future.
The whole subject of advertising with voice, in my personal opinion, I see advertising, the whole industrial complex, failing. One of the reasons why we're having this conversation on podcasts and not radio, and people are listening more to podcasts and radio, is because it's radio without advertising. Why we're watching Netflix instead of TV is because it's TV without advertising. So I think advertising in its current format or in its historic format, it's counting its days. So the relevancy point is crucial. And the reason why I think advertising, the concept of it, is so key to discuss within the voice conversation is because if we're trying to mimic human communication, if I'm having a conversation with you right now, you wouldn't like it if Rajesh just bumps in and says, by the way, guys, I've got these amazing shoes from Nike that I recommend you to buy.
Yeah, okay.
So if I'm having an interaction with a voice application or my voice assistant at home or wherever I am, as you said, if, for example, the Tide application, going back to that, if it's giving me tips on how to remove a specific stain, and then you get through the process and you realize that the process that it's given you, the advice that it's given you, isn't removing the stain, it could then recommend, because it knows the context of the situation, it understands your need.
Okay.
I have this, Tide detergent that will be able to get rid of that stain. So relevancy within the communication, the same way that if I'm speaking to you and I'm telling you challenges that I'm having, you could then advise a specific product to me. That's relevant. But beyond that, I still don't think that advertising is in that form should be how brands should utilize voice for their advertising efforts. I think it needs to be by providing the utility that we mentioned, so that they're leveraging utility towards their brand. So they're gaining brand awareness through providing a utility. An example I could give is, Campbell's Soup company in America. They've created an app that provides utility. Nothing to do with Campbell. They're providing you an app that basically gives you recipes. So what's it done here? It's taken the subject, which is food, okay? But it hasn't necessarily made it specific to Campbell. So it's provided you the utility in the kitchen to know how to make recipes. Yep. So then whenever you're invoking that application, you're thinking of Campbell. So that's the way it's advertising. That's the way it's, gaining that brand awareness and retaining that brand attachment by providing a utility. So I think brands really need to focus on that element than just having by the way, buy this product.
Okay.
Yeah, it matters a lot. It's permission-based, right? The consumer has to enable the skill, and then it's at a very subtle level. A lot of this is non-conscious. You're interacting with, say, Campbell's, say, with the skill. You're mentioning the brand once. You're feeling this relationship. And it's not a conscious process where you're thinking about, oh, I like Campbell's because they gave me this skill and I can do it. It's more just the next time you see that label, Campbell's Soup, in a retail store, you just have a warmer feeling towards this brand, and you're more inclined to reach towards it.
Yeah.
And there may be conscious aspects to it as well. You're thinking about, well, this brand seems to know food better than some of the others. But this has always been a useful way of looking at developing your brand name, and that being the main way in which we increase purchase behavior, not through just sheer advertising that's about giving information or interrupting people.
Yeah.
It's more about these subtle ways in which we develop these relationships, and I think these skills allow that.
I think in current day marketing lingo, it's just content marketing.
Yep.
So if I'm a car mechanic, I'm not going to constantly try to convince you to come to my I'm not going to constantly sell you, okay, come, I'll fix your car. I will create blogs and guides on how to fix your car if it ever breaks down. I'll create 1-minute videos, tips. And then that's sort of, I guess, specializing, right? It's saying, look, I know cars very well. I know how to fix cars. Absolutely. I will show you how to fix cars by yourself for free, and I won't charge you for it. But subconsciously, any consumer or any viewer is going to say, oh, actually, Amin's the guy to go to in case we need this. And it's interesting. So when I was a teenager, I used to have a tutorials page on YouTube, how to use Photoshop, how to create videos and that kind of thing. And strangely, I didn't know this back then, but I was getting a lot of requests from companies. One that was really random, a Norwegian protein shake company. sent me a message saying, "Can you create our labels for us?" And that was content marketing because he saw somebody create a tutorial on how to use Photoshop. He assumed expertise. So
He knew you knew what you were talking about.
I mean, I guess so. But I'm just like, so to bring this back to voice, with Campbell's soup, they're not just going to say, "Buy our soup, it's the tastiest soup you've ever had in your life." They're going to say, "Oh, have you ever thought of making a cake? You know, it's Mother's Day. Why don't you bake her a cake?" And you associate good vibes with Campbell's soup. Oh, Campbell's soup is friendly. It's thinking of my relationships and my family.
Which goes back to the question of how can brands utilize voice. That's one way. I mean, the benefits of voice to them, obviously, the frictionless experience that we've been discussing that voice provides a consumer, that obviously is ideal. One of the benefits, one of the objectives of brands is to create habit-forming interactions with their...
Habit forming. Tell us more about that. What's habit forming?
So the easier something is, as you were mentioning, to acquire, as much as you're removing frictions, there's a whole nudge theory. Cass Sunstein, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, removing friction removing friction from the purchasing process. Obviously, that provides the perfect opportunity to form a habit to continually purchase that product.
Right.
So if if a brand is able to provide an application that allows you to purchase a product with much fewer steps than other brands, that puts you in the perfect position to build a habit within that brand. And then that will allow you to obviously build longer and longer brand retention. So that's that's one benefit. The other benefits are about the brand personality, which we've been mentioning as well. But the point of friction, I think, is critical.
Yeah, you can think about an analogy as the Amazon Dash buttons, right? Press the button, get the order.
Exactly.
This is even simpler than that. You just tell your Alexa device, order another set of this.
Without needing to actually physically
go look for the dash.
Go find the dash, manipulate your smartphone and all these things. It's all there.
Okay. So the new term then, voice persona. What's a voice persona?
Think of a human persona. Think of the way that you want to express yourself to others. Brands have, for decades, used packaging, designing, and many other visual elements to portray a specific persona, a specific brand persona. They haven't necessarily had to ever think about what do they sound like. Are they old? Are they young? Female? Are they male? Etc., etc. So to build your voice persona, all of these things have to be considered by brands. And by building this voice persona, if they do it properly, they have the opportunity to build brand attachment an emotional attachment to their brand that they've never had before. Having that within your home, an app that provides a utility from that brand with this tone, etc., etc. It's never been thought of. We still don't have the answers. Everyone's still delving into it and trying to figure out how brands could best do this.
Right.
We have our own way of looking at it. We base it on first date communications. So if you think about
first date communications,
indeed. So if you think about when you go on a date, especially the first date, there are specific things that you want to see from the person that you're dating for you to want to meet them again.
Okay.
Their responsiveness, personality. Are you able to get a word in edgeways? Their awareness of the situation.
Right.
Their understanding of what you're trying to say.
Okay.
If the voice interaction with a consumer that the brand provides mimics those elements that provides us with the opportunity to go on a second date, if they're met in that interaction, it's perfect for brands because they're able to retain the user for the next conversation. And then obviously the next conversation, the person has gotten to know you from the first conversation, so you don't have to start from scratch again. And then again, it gets to know you, and then long term, you get married and have kids.
Wow.
So
happy ending.
Yes. So that's the power of brand persona.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I would add to that. This is an interesting point on how it's been done in the past versus today. So we talk about brand personality a lot in marketing. As you're saying, it's mainly been on a visual aspect. It's also always been a one-way communication. I talk to you about my brand, and you may have, let's say, a spokesperson model that you use a lot. So For instance, Dos Equis has the most interesting man in the world. I don't know if you've seen this one. Or some of these other brands, they have kind of, say, one spokesperson.
Right.
But you don't interact with that person in the way that you're going to interact with a voice assistant or a skill. So you have the persona that includes the actual voice that's used in the communicating with you, but also the way it's learning more about you, the way you're developing this relationship with that persona. And that's a new form of interaction that hasn't been there in the past. Typically, it's been just here's our label. This is what it looks like. This is kind of the product itself. All these contribute to a brand that's masculine or sincere or whatever it might be. But now you have many more ways of developing that relationship.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on the fact a brand like Hollister, for example? If you go into a Hollister store, they have handpicked 18 to 24-year-old models, good looking, both male and female. Would you not argue that was part of them creating a persona around the brand?
Yeah, so I would agree that your kind of frontline employees are part of that brand personality for sure. The difference here is that now those are just a few individual workers who are there working for the summer and then they're off, right? We're talking about developing a persona that's going to stick with that brand for a very long time.
Right.
And it's scaling, right? We're talking about millions of consumers interacting with
that one person / brand.
Yeah. So definitely, I think what you're recognizing here, it's about people, and what we're saying here is that your voice persona is your person. That's the person that your consumers are ultimately going to interact with.
And how important is this?
Critical. The reason why it's so critical is because it's associated with a topic that I've recently become very fond of, thanks to Scott Galloway, who's the marketing professor at NYU. He posits that we're seeing the decline of brand. Historically, we've been used to brands providing pretty average or good products, but adding a premium to the price based on the packaging, the design, and all of the emotional and visual elements that have enticed us towards that product. And we've fallen for that trap, if you like, or assistance, depending how you look at it, because as a cognitive heuristic, it's a shortcut. We didn't have the way he terms weapons of due diligence.
Wow.
That we have today in the form of TripAdvisor, Google Search, and other review sites, where we're able to go and analyze different products and see which ones are really good. We just fell for the way that the product was presented by a brand, and we said, we're going to go for that. And we were offered, prices with really high premiums because of this. Then with the advent of Google, we started seeing the decline of brand. So we're seeing more non-branded items being searched. So if you're searching for a specific product, you're not adding a prefix of a brand to that search as much as you used to. So if you're looking for batteries, you may have said Duracell batteries because you only associated batteries with Duracell. But then slowly we've been moving towards just requesting batteries. And Google has played a big part in that, as have, for example, TripAdvisor. There are hotels that you'll stay in that you've never heard of the brand before. Why? Because you've gone on TripAdvisor and you've seen that this hotel has been reviewed by enough people for me to trust staying there.
Okay.
This is very, very dangerous to brands because it means that they're going to have to really start thinking about how else are we going to get people to buy our products. Obviously, it's by providing better products at better prices. And I think that's one of the reasons why I believe that Amazon is essentially leading this war on brands, if you like. Because the reason why Amazon has been so successful, especially with low involvement products that don't require as much of our attention to purchase as high involvement products, which come with a higher risk. Amazon's basically come in and, said that we can provide the products that you need at the right price without this premium that brands have been throwing out there. So Jeff Bezos is essentially the general of this war on brands, and the consumers are his soldiers.
War on brands?
Absolutely.
Who's fighting who?
Jeff Bezos, Amazon, companies that are able to, and they're doing the right thing here. What they're basically doing is, instead of falling for all of the, extra emotional visual cues that are convincing you of buying the product as opposed to buying it because it's actually better for you, we're reducing it down to, is this product sufficient for my needs? Is it at the right price? Great, I'll go for that. company or provider.
Even say Airbnb is on this
Perfect
war,
example.
right?
Absolutely. And I think it's only good for consumers. And that's not to say that brands were necessarily coming from a crooked and Machiavellian outlook or approach. But we're now, and again, I still stress it's mainly to do with low involvement products.
Well, I can back up your claims there. I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday that mentioned specifically Amazon. Do you know how many basics they have? Do you know what I mean when I say basics? I mean, for example, the Duracell, they have so much data on people buying batteries and they can read all the reviews. So you know what the most purchased type of battery is and in what size, right? So Amazon created the Amazon Basics battery, significantly cheaper than competition and serves the same utility, same purpose. They now have 1,300 basics of all things you could think of: gloves, headphones,
iPhone chargers,
microphones. It doesn't matter.
Everything.
And it's a whole new parallel. It's a whole new vertical, which they might have not even thought of before. So yeah, I guess in a way you can argue that is a war on brands.
Absolutely.
Because saying you don't need to go to Duracell. Here's the Amazon battery, Basics battery, which serves the same purpose for a quarter of the price.
But we had to, because we didn't have, again, those weapons of due diligence. We just relied. We had brands on one side, and we had the needs of the customer on the other side. And we had this whole ocean of unknown between those two islands. Then the bridges were formed: TripAdvisor, Google, etc., etc. And that's great. And that's why voice is so important, because now brands aren't given the same opportunity of providing visual cues. Obviously, on some voice devices where there are screens, they can still implement some elements of visuality, but they can't rely so much on visual, and they're going to have to develop their voice personality to build that emotional attachment, which is key for the future of brands.
So I'm going to ask you a critical question here, just to hit this kind of angle on the privacy aspect, on the monopoly aspect. You've got 70% is controlled by Amazon at the moment, so 70% Alexa. What are the implications of this? It's just their platform. We all know that Amazon is the number one e-commerce company in the world. They sell everything you could think of. But they are also going to be in all our homes and in the future, all our offices. So should we be alarmed? How are Amazon approaching this?
So I think this is a whole nother discussion, of course, right? Especially with all the recent things that have come out.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think this is going to be part of the resistance towards getting a device in the home. There are some people who are very concerned about privacy and the idea of these corporations getting bigger and learning more. And I think some people are also maybe they take it too far. They think Amazon is listening all the time and getting all the information about your family and illegal recordings and things like this. So I think that'll be a part of why it doesn't take off as quickly, because of the recent issues.
Yep.
For some consumers, though, the ones who are most concerned about privacy. But it's really hard to say how things will play out in the long term.
I'm less concerned about what the voice platform providers are going to do with the data. I'm more concerned with hacking issues. So similar with Facebook, the way that I see it is, there are risks associated with voice. You've got, for example, the concept of replay attacks, which is where right now there are technologies that can replicate your voice. So you could, for example, facilitate a transaction via voice with a recording of my voice. That's going to have to be a focus for a lot of voice platform providers. How are they going to prevent the potential of replay attacks? Then there's hacking issues. We've already seen what's happened recently in the news with regards to hacking from foreign countries. So it's very, very important to understand how are we going to combat hacking, how are we going to combat replay attacks, and obviously the privacy issues surrounding the data is not necessarily an Amazon or a Facebook or a Google issue. It's outsiders beyond that who want to do nasty things with that information. Because for me, at the end of the day, the more a platform provider that I trust gets to know me and knows what I want, hey, go for it. I'd love you to introduce products to me. The only risk with the way we're going in society, where we are offered products that companies know we want or would be interested in, the risk of that is that we're not being provided things that maybe we didn't know we were interested in.
Okay.
So historically,
which is good.
Yes, I mean there have been many occasions where I would never have thought of being interested in a certain product. Then I see, I'm like, you know what, I'll try that.
Yeah.
So there's a risk associated with this personalization of advertising and marketing, whereby I won't be introduced to products that maybe I haven't suggested to my voice assistant that I'd be interested in, but I am interested in. So it's interesting how it will play out.
You went to the Smart Voice Summit.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago. Tell us about that.
We presented there in February. The guys
February 2018.
February 2018. Okay. So yeah, literally just last month. Smartly AI, which is the way I look at it, is very similar to a Wix of voice app development. Yeah. They created a fantastic voice summit with Google in Paris, and we were invited to speak as one of the startups, even though we're not a startup, we're just an MBA project, if you like. And it was great because what you saw there is everybody in the room felt like something revolutionary was happening. And we all felt really glad to be part of it. We knew something. It's almost like when you found some information about a stock that's about to blow up, you're all keeping it kind of quiet and you're just like, oh, did you invest too? Oh, amazing, fantastic. So there was a really cool vibe there, and you had voice for transport, voice for retail, voice for media, and it just showed how the application of voice and the ramifications that voice interfaces, again, forget about Alexa, forget about Google, the concept of communicating with technology via our voice, that aspect has so many applications in everything we do. We didn't even speak about Alexa for Business, where, the same way, we're at the moment right now where computers haven't been introduced into offices yet or homes. We're still writing with pen and pad. And there's this whole thing called computer technology about to come in, which will make everything easier for us. We're at that stage right now with voice, where voice is about to enter businesses. If you want to book a room, if you want to set up a meeting, if you want to, call, if you want to do this or that, we're at that stage. And that's how everybody felt at the Smart Voice Summit, where we know it's a reality, maybe not in the current manifestation, but it's going to be in some sort of manifestation, and we're all really happy to be part of it. And the opportunities out there for developers, for marketers, for brands, for everybody, it's fantastic.
Rajesh, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah. So, just back to the point on the privacy thing is my view on it. It's more of a perception thing, more about consumers' perception right now because of all the media attention on these issues. But it's no different from other technologies that they're already using in terms of the risks. Like you said, there's hacking risks, just as there's always been. And as with anything, it takes time to work these things through.
Yep. If someone's listening now and is really interested in getting stuck in, they're like, you know what, Rajesh, Sina, you've convinced me. You've won me over. This is a technology of the very near future. What should they do? I mean, are there jobs open? Are there voice jobs open?
I would say one thing to focus in on, and this might help bring some of the listeners in a bit more and more on our side. It's important to note that, as with all kinds of technologies, the first adopters, early adopters, are those who get the most value from the technology, from, say, the use of voice, and then it builds up from there. So think about, where are we going to need to use voice first? Who are the kinds of people who needed this yesterday, being able to interact with voice? So you see a lot of uses right now, which are, I'm in the kitchen. My hands are dirty. I'm cleaning. What can I do? I can talk to my assistant here. The assistant can help you as you cook, those kinds of things. So for those who really want to get started right away and get excited with things, think about, what could you do right away that is a kind of a pressing need within the space? And some of those jobs there that
absolutely, and I think that's a very important point because, it's not coming from a place. I'm not coming from a place of being like a voice tech nerd who wants a voice to be imbued with in everything. There are certain things that, whether it's private or that we just have a flow of interacting with that requires texting or typing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not about voice only or about just voice. It's find those. If it comes back to your question of what is there to do in voice. If we're speaking with a student or a developer, find those activities that we're doing that seem to have too many levels of friction for what could be, as I said, distilled to a yes or no answer.
Wow.
Develop a voice app for it. if we're speaking with people who are interested in getting into the voice space generally, I mean, Amazon have about, I think, 12 or 1,300 people was the latest number working just on Alexa, which is the largest you'll see in any company working on any division. It's just phenomenal. Look on the Amazon website, look on the Google website. There's IBM.
Apple HomePod.
Apple HomePod,
Actually,
absolutely.
you made a comment earlier. Is HomePod doing something different?
I don't deem it as who am I to not deem it? But a lot of the experts don't deem it as a smart speaker because it's more designed for a nice sound experience, audio experience.
Right. Okay.
It has Siri on it, but it doesn't provide anywhere near the utility that Alexa and Google Home provide.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you've got IBM Watson, which they're going to introduce within the office. You've got Microsoft Cortana, which is the voice assistant within the office. So it's going to imbue everywhere, and it's important for everybody to look at what are the opportunities out there, either working for a voice company, either going and consulting brands on how voice could be useful to them, which is what we're trying to do, bridge that gap, developing the apps. Think about, again, I'm very passionate about looking at the history of a new technology because we'll see a lot of the same things cropping up again. Think about the iOS store when it just came out, when the iOS store was released. There were hardly any apps. So the killer apps still hadn't come out. We're at that stage right now with Alexa and with Google Home. The killer app isn't there. There's so much opportunity. Go and get that real estate, that plot of land before it gets really, really expensive. Because if you've got that before others do, you'll be laughing.
Well, everybody, you heard it here first. It's an exciting time. We're right at the start of this. Anyone that was going to jump on this is an early adopter. And Sina Kahen from Voice and Dr. Rajesh Bhargave, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
A very fascinating conversation. Voice is the future, and I'm glad that we managed to shed some light on the topic. Or manage to imbue our voices through this channel, through this medium, to tell people about it, and I guess be evangelists for this up-and-coming interface, which will have an impact on people around the world.
Absolutely.
So I was your host, Amin Siala. This was the podcast at Imperial College Business School. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Make sure you subscribed on iTunes and on YouTube. Just search for the Business Podcast at Imperial College. Thanks a lot. Take care, and Siri, stop recording.